opening remarks. Be joining very soon. First of all, thank you to everyone for joining this important webinar. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of us joining from across the globe. I could see people from around the world are joining from Nepal, Austria, South Africa. So please do add your name, your organization from where you are. There is a purpose behind asking this request because this is not just one seminar we are looking at. This is a year-long webinar series, which I would highlight a bit more information on that. So I'm representing International Water Management Institute. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all on this important webinar series globally convened by all the global partners, which I would go a bit more details on that. And the purpose of this particular event is to really bring much more clarity and the research, innovations, and advocacy around the field of early warning for all, which is led by the UN and other partners, bold initiatives that ensuring every person on Earth should be protected by early warning systems by 2027. It's a very ambitious goal. That's where an initiative like this would also add values to the initiative that we are all aiming to get supported and look forward. And which is why the theme of advancing early warning for all, which is an initiative led by IWMI in collaboration with the World Meteorological Organization, United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, the International Telecommunication Unit, ITU, the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, IFRC, which you might know very well, and the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific. In short, it is UNESCAP, Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, we call REAP, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration from NOAA, UK Met Office, COPE Disaster. You will learn a lot how they are championing with the communities in the due course of the months. And last but not least, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So without this partnership, I don't think we would have earmarked to this launch of IWMI's global webinar series. The dialogue is mostly about knowledge sharing and partnership in support to this major initiative, as I said. So this webinar is going to happen bi-weekly over the spread until the month of December. And we would love to have all of you and also the new people, because it still haven't reached to global community on this initiative. We hope people like you joining in the online, as well as the partners who would be advocating on this important event to have more deep dive sessions as we go forward. And the important point also is to look at how these innovations that the speakers, the global experts are going to talk about is going to be an actionable solutions to enhance early warning capacities in the country where you are working, engaging dialogue with stakeholders in the government you are working with, private sectors and civil societies. So the webinar is framed around 8 sessions. What you are seeing today is about the foundation and key concepts of early warning for all, which the inaugural talk will be provided by Dr. Johan from WMO. And we will have the science behind the early warning within the foundation and key concept. And then we will have the other 7 sessions, which are more around success and challenges of multi-hazard early warning, more focusing to the listening to the voices of communities-led initiatives, several initiatives led by IFRC, a lot of community-based organization. And also we are looking at how this whole value chain of early warning is going to look at across the sectors. The innovations in AI, we cannot forget about. We wake up and look at a lot more content coming in real time. A lot of credit goes to the technologies coming from AI. And there are not to forget about the involvement of gender, equity, and social inclusion, which is last mile delivery. We will be working with ITU and many other partners, UNDRR. They are all here with us today. And also look at what would be the future investments in early warning and aligning to the regional and global initiatives in climate adaptation policies. The last but not least, we would also look at strategic recommendations that's coming from this dialogue to provide an impactful recommendations to the early warning for all initiatives. With that, I just want to give the floor to Mark Smith, who is our Director General, International Water Management Institute. Over to you, Mark Smith.
Great. Thank you very much, Giriraj. Good to see everyone online here, and a warm welcome to everyone who's joined us on behalf of IWMI. As Giriraj has explained, today's webinar is the first in a series on advancing early warning for all. The origins of this idea of convening this series, from the IWMI side at least, are based in work that we've been involved in for the last several years with the CGIAR Climate Resilience Initiative, and now the CGIAR Climate Action Science Program. These are programs in CGIAR that have involved Giriraj and scientists from across CGIAR's research centers. They recognized that CGIAR and its research centers, we needed to do more. We needed to do more to better connect our research on early warning and anticipatory action to the UN's Early Warnings for All initiative, and the global commitment that this represents, as Giriraj mentioned, that this represents to bringing every person on Earth under the protection of an early warning system by 2027. We recognized that we could do more to contribute to this vital agenda, and therefore we saw it as a priority to better support the leadership of the Early Warnings for All initiative and its coalition of partners. So we're really grateful, therefore, to our co-organizers for this webinar series, for coming together in this venture, WMO and UNDRR and the ITU and IFRC, also UNESCAP, the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, NOAA, the UK Met Office, COPE Disaster, and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So thank you to all of those organizations for that cooperation, and for their representatives, and to their representatives here today, and to everyone who's joined us online today. Now, all of us taking part today, I would think, are motivated to be here because we recognize that across the world, communities are facing climate extremes with increasing frequency and severity. So floods, droughts, storms, wildfires, heat waves that put lives, livelihoods, and ecosystems at risk. And yet half the global population still lacks access to adequate early warning systems. And this is not, unfortunately, just a technical gap. It's also a development imperative that requires that we work jointly to overcome. At IWMI, we're able to contribute research and innovation that helps to bridge technology and climate action for proactive risk management. We build on years of work on climate risk assessment, open source early warning tools, the Aware Decision support platform for anticipatory action, and more recent innovations now also in digital twin technology. We're co-developing drought and flood monitoring and management systems with national governments across Asia and across Africa. We're working with farmers, water managers, humanitarian actors, financial institutions to ensure that warnings trigger action. But advancing early warnings for all is not only about technology, it's about people. It's about designing for the last mile, ensuring that warnings are timely, understandable, and actionable, and grounded in local knowledge and trust. It's about empowering communities, particularly women, youth, and marginalized groups, to prepare, respond, and recover. Early warnings for all, therefore, demands collaboration, and collaboration at scale. Today's launch of the global webinar series signals the commitment of all the convening partners to collective action, to breaking silos, to linking data with decisions, and to aligning investments with impact. It's together that we can scale innovations, strengthen institutional capacities, and ensure that early warning is a foundation of climate resilience and sustainable development. So as we begin this webinar series, then I invite all of us to keep one question at the top of our minds. Will the next storm or drought find us better prepared, more connected, and more compassionate? If we can keep answering yes, then we're moving in the right direction. So I'm grateful to everyone involved in organizing today's event and the 7 sessions to come. I hope they're going to provide a really valuable set of opportunities to discuss joint action plans and partnerships to strengthen these goals, strengthen the goal of early warnings for all. So I wish everyone an enjoyable and really productive dialogue today. Thank you. And back to you, I think, Giriraj.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark, for these excellent remarks. And I think you set the context of It's not just about early warning is an technology focus. It's about delivering the last mile and also the integration of the sectoral thinking you talked about in water management to farm resilience water systems. Without much delay, I would like to invite Dr. Johan Sander, the Director of Service from World Meteorological Organization, to speak on the inaugural talk on what we call is the pillar session 1 is about bringing the whole focus from concept to action, unpacking the foundations of early warning for all, and accelerating the support. Over to you, Dr. Johan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark, for those excellent points made already. And also, I would like to say good day to all our colleagues and partners and familiar faces, Laurie, Vanessa, Jonathan. It's good to see all of you. And then Erica from the WMO will be on the panel as well. It's really good to see all of you on this day. And therefore, on behalf of the World Meteorological Organization, and I just want to make sure that you can see the slides. Yes, thank you. So on behalf of the World Meteorological Organization, our Secretary General, Professor Celeste Saulo, I'm really honored to welcome you to this first session and in this important webinar series, Advancing Early Warnings for All. This series makes a significant step in our collective journey to turn the vision of the UN Secretary General with regards to Early Warnings for All initiative into a reality, where every person on Earth is protected by life-saving early warning systems by 2025. Today's session, From Concept to Action, is more than a thematic starting point. It is called to catalyze momentum from global commitment to local implementation. We are not just unpacking definitions and frameworks, we are setting the stage for impact, the kind of impact that equips communities, empowers institutions, and ultimately saves lives. If we then give us a moment just to reflect on the initiative itself, if we go to the next slide, then this initiative is, as you may recall, co-led by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, our wonderful colleagues in our building, and the World Meteorological Organization, and supported by many partners, including the International Federation of the Red Cross Crescent Societies and the International Telecommunication Union, ITU. These organizations are leading the work on the 4 early warning system pillars, as you can see, pillar 1, 2, 3, and 4. An effective early warning is only possible if there's a strong connection between these 4 components, and if the full value cycle therefore needs to be together. This requires an active engagement, interactions, and involvement of all actors, including national and local governments and a wide range of stakeholders at all levels. Early Warnings for All was initially targeting 30 countries. Partners worked with countries and partners to identify the minimum core capabilities for effective early warning service. We worked to develop tools and technology guidance and intensify resources, mobilization, and high-level political engagement. We are now at a critical juncture with just 3 years left until 2027. Accelerate action, build on progress, and ensure that Early Warnings for All is scaled up effectively. Countries must lead the way in embedding early warning capabilities into national systems, and we must ensure that our support is tailored to their realities. We call this next phase broadening the tent. This webinar represents an important step in the next phase. We look to ramp up our partnerships and engagement to extend the number of countries investing in early warning systems. We are prioritizing our efforts during this phase of the following, the rapid identification, the engage regional and national partners, enhance the national ownership, which is extremely important, and the focus on immediate priorities. We have an excellent panel that will delve further into these shortly. In closing, I would like to note that the WMO is proud to co-lead the global movement together with our valued partners, as you've mentioned, the UNTRR, ITU, and the IFRC. And Mark also referred to UNESCAP, NOAA, REAP, and then also the Cope Disaster and Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure. We should not forget about them. And of course, the International Water Management Institute on behalf of CGIAR. This risk collaboration, collaboration reflects the diversity and depth of expertise required to achieve an inclusive multi-stakeholder to achieve the core objectives of early warnings for all. This 8-part series will traverse a full landscape of early warning systems, from community-led initiatives and cutting-edge technology to financing, governance, and policy alignment. But more importantly, we hope it will ignite concrete action on the ground. We want to hear your experience, your challenges, and innovations, because that's how we learn. And that's how we build systems that work, not just in theory, but in practice. We hope we can use this platform to strengthen existing collaborations, ignite new ones, and build bridges across disciplines and regions. We hope that the start can trigger more actionable solutions to enhance early warning systems and reduce the impacts of climate-related hazardous events. With that, Chair, I thank you, and back to you.
Thank you, Dr. John. Really appreciate your support for highlighting the insights on what is happening. I recall when the early warning for all initiative was started, it was more about understanding the risk and where the prioritization should happen. I see there is a great momentum. I've shifted already on the progress that is being delivered across the pillar. I want to give the floor to Dr. Alok Sika, who can moderate and ask any questions. I do ask colleagues in the chat box if there is any questions to Dr. Johan. Please do stay with us for another couple of minutes, so that any specific questions from our participants could be shared by your responses. With that, let me introduce Dr. Alok Sika, IWMI representative for India and Bangladesh. Over to you, Dr. Sika, to moderate this session.
Thank you, Giriraj, and thanks, Mark Smith, and today's first opening speaker, Dr. Han. And I think, first of all, let me thank Giriraj for initiating this particular thing together with all other key partners, and also Dr. Johan for being the first keynote speaker for this particular webinar series. So now I think it was really a very useful and insightful presentation, and where he has definitely laid out emphasis on rapid prioritization, and which is really very, very important, and also how to strengthen the existing collaboration going forward, because that's really very important. So I think now the house is open for another 3-4 minutes for any participants who are there online. They can raise hand and ask the question. So do you see, Giriraj? I don't see anybody's
I could see there is a hand raised, but I don't see now. Yeah, but we could move on to panel. Yeah, I see Dharam Raj Upreti want to ask a question. Over to you, Dharam. Dharam, we can't hear you if you are asking your question. Yeah.
I think
there is some technical issue.
Technical issue, so maybe we can come back. But I see there is a question, Giri, on the this thing that from Kafa FIA on how can inclusive and community-driven early warning systems enhance resilience and preparedness for climate-related disaster. So if Dr. Han, would you like to take this up?
in the meantime, can I ask?
Okay, so since you are back, just be quick, please, because
Yeah,
we have to get
thanks.
into the panel.
Thank you very much. So it's a great event, early warning for all, and early warning for all initiative that started from Egypt, and then it has been advancing. But early warning for all initiative require, a strong data detection system. That means the system that could detect hazards, especially temperature, precipitation, and in the river system, river discharge. But that require huge investment, and investment at a country level yet to come from early warning for all initiative, and many countries yet to start the process. So how can we foster this initiative at a country level so that we could make a robust end-to-end early warning system at a country level in order to save lives and properties of the communities? Thanks.
All right, so Dr. Johan,
Yes, I'm here.
yes, please.
I think what's important is that as we roll out these national consultative workshops, we go through a process where all partners, and that's now the UNDRR, the National Meteorological Service, the Hydrological Service, and all other partners in the country with ITU and IFRC, start mapping out, the requirements in a specific country or the gaps that they may occur in a certain country, and then they also identify the costs related to that specific activity. And sometimes it's not that expensive because sometimes we've got the equipment there, but the data is not yet shared. And this is where, with the assistance of the four partners, WMO, UNDRR, IFRC, and ITU, we can start sending this information to our regional centers where the information can then be provided. We've got various other options which we can offer. We've got what we call the Sustainable Observation Finance Facility, where a lot of our members, capital M, contribute voluntarily towards it, and where we then install instrumentation in least developed countries to enhance the observing network. And once you enhance the observing network, you've got more data, and the cost for that is not a lot. So there are funding agencies willing to fund infrastructure, and then there's funding agencies who are willing to fund that capacity development and training and training processes we need to make sure that we upscale the various countries. I hope that answers the question, Chair.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Dr. Johan. So I think now we move on to the panel discussion because we are now, let me start it right on time so that we have more time for discussion. So there are four panelists, as you might have seen. Let me just very quickly call upon Dr. Erika Alice, who is the Chief of DRR, Partner Engagement and Coordination Section from WMO. And then we have Dr. Loreto. She is a Chief Risk Knowledge Monitoring and Capacity Development Branch at the UNDRR. And then we have Vanessa Gray, Head of the Climate and Emergency Telecommunication from the ITU, and Mr. Jonathan Stone, who is the Manager, Climate, Environment and Resilience from IFRC. So let me now put this thing. There are going to be two quick rounds, so like a rapid fire. So because, as always it happens in the panel discussion, you got to have a shortage of time. So the first round, and you'll have a maximum 1.5 to 2 minutes. So I'll just go straight to Erika with the first opening question from the WMO, that how do you think that WMO is scaling observational and the forecasting capacity globally, and especially so in the vulnerable regions which are really having a large gaps in terms of the infrastructures and the data? So over to you, Erika.
Great. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you also for highlighting and zooming in on one of the most critical areas of multi-hazard early warning systems. And I think I would even go a bit further and illustrate how we're working to ensure multi-hazard early warning systems reach displaced and marginalized populations in fragile and conflict-affected settings, because these are actually some of the most vulnerable communities worldwide. I think it's important to note that these communities are really on the front line of the climate crisis, and they had very little to do with contributing to the underlying causes of the climate crisis itself. And unfortunately, they're often left without information or the resources really needed to prepare and respond to hazardous events. I think I wanted to highlight just a couple of statistics on why it's really important to be focusing in FCV context. For every $1 invested in disaster risk reduction, we can save up to 15 in avoided losses and $5 in humanitarian response costs. So I think it's underlining, really the case for scaling up resources and funding in these areas. I think it's also important to note that countries with less comprehensive MHUs have disaster-related mortality ratio that is nearly 6 times higher than that of countries with substantial to comprehensive coverage of multi-hazard early warning systems. I think it's really just important to note that we're working together with the partners that you'll hear from later, because we really need to. We have to do more together. There's not really one institution that can solve some of these challenges alone, and we're also welcoming, the collaboration with the CGIAR and other individuals that have joined this webinar to kind of scale up our efforts. Concretely, one of the elements that we're working on through Early Warnings for All is within 9 fragile and conflict-affected countries, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Somalia, South Sudan, Burundi, Chad, Comoros, and Haiti. We're really working concertedly to scale up how we're supporting these countries to issue warnings and enable action ahead of severe events. Cruise is one of our largest donors for FCVs, and they've developed their operational procedures to strengthen support for FCVs. I think Johan did a nice job already of indicating how we're working to scale up on observations in terms of looking at some of the gaps when we go in and conduct initial priority assessments and consultations. We do leverage the systematic observation and financing facility to really scale up funding around some of the basic infrastructure. I think it's really important to note, though, that more needs to be done in terms of hydrology. There's a really underfunded aspect in terms of observation and forecasting. So looking forward to collaborating with you on this. And I really just wanted to thank you for the opportunity, and maybe I'll conclude it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll maybe come back depending on the time. And so let me move on to Loretta from the UNDRR. And can you share with us what are the best practices in translating disaster risk knowledge into policy and investment decisions across countries? So this is for you, Loretta.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here with my colleagues today. I think it's a great question, because translating disaster risk knowledge into effective policy investment decisions is probably one of the biggest challenges, but also opportunities in disaster risk reduction. And when it comes to early warning systems, Pillar 1 on risk knowledge is currently the least resourced of all the pillars, and it's the one in which member states are reporting that they're really struggling to see advances in. So I think it'd be useful to understand, why is it such a challenge for countries to translate disaster risk knowledge into effective policies, investments, but also early warning systems. And I think part of the reason is that risk knowledge is often complex, it's uncertain. The risk data involving future scenarios, compounded risks, low onset hazards can be complex to understand sometimes, and is filled with uncertainty. In fact, I saw one of the questions in the chat was around uncertainty. So it's really important that risk knowledge is produced in such a way that really enables people to take action. So there's a bit of a disconnect now between the producers of risk knowledge and the decision makers. So even when technical agencies produce excellent data, it's not always packaged in actionable formats, and there's a lack of dialogue sometimes as well. Additionally, when it comes to early warning systems, we do tend to see a focus on hazards, but perhaps not enough of a focus yet on understanding vulnerability. And understanding vulnerability and the exposure of at-risk populations to hazardous events isn't getting enough attention or traction yet. And that's what's really required to ensure that you have really effective end-to-end early warning systems that really reach the last mile. Of course, and Erica just mentioned the challenges of, but also the opportunities of working in fragile contexts. We do know that many countries still lack reliable, but also disaggregated and up-to-date risk data. And even when the data exists, the institutional capacity to apply it can still be somewhat limited. And that's why I'm very grateful that the colleagues working on early warning for all recognize the importance of investing more time and effort in these fragile and highly vulnerable contexts so that we can help fill some of these data gaps and help them develop the capacity they need to use the risk knowledge. There are good examples of where risk knowledge has been integrated into policies and programming for early warning, but more broadly for disaster risk reduction. And notably, this is often where member states and governments mandate it and say it's required that this risk knowledge is used. And if I can just give the example of the Philippines, where the government has mandated the integration of disaster risk reduction into local development plans, which is, of course, what we want. We want urban plans and local plans that are aiming to build a resilient society that can withstand the impact of disasters. But here, there's a requirement that cities and municipalities include hazard maps, climate change projections, climate impact models, geo-reference, exposure and vulnerability data as well. And many of us are familiar with Bangladesh's very successful multi-hazard early warning systems, where we've seen cyclone mortality drop dramatically in 30 years. And here, of course, it's part of the planning is that governments and stakeholders have access to reliable and localized risk data to guide infrastructure planning, preparedness, and response. And we've also seen that Bangladesh has successfully integrated historical impact data for use in hydrological forecasting and agricultural planning. And maybe just to turn to Africa for a moment, and I would mention the African Risk Capacity, which has developed a paramedic insurance mechanism that enables African governments to access rapid funding for disaster response. And here, the ARC is combining early warning triggers with peer range of financing. And this is using models based on risk information and impact data. So this is all quite critical for the work that's moving ahead.
Thank you.
Yes, and so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, yeah, we'll come back to you. So thank you very much. Sorry for me in between. So I think
Absolutely
next
fine.
I move to our colleague from ITU. And so, Vanessa, what we would like to know from you, if you can share that what technologies and standards are being deployed to ensure timely and reliable communication of early warning, especially to remote, underserved, and those particularly the vulnerable communities. So over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having us here at this webinar. A great opportunity also to speak, of course, with together with the other pillar leads. So maybe just very briefly, the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, we're the UN specialized agency for digital technologies. So within this initiative, our role is really very much to make sure that we take advantage of new technologies, digital technologies, old and new technologies actually, and also make sure that the private sector, that we're working with the private sector and see how the private sector can help contribute to reaching people at risk. So we're leading on the pillar 3 on warning, dissemination, and communication. And again, so this is really once we know something is happening, how do we make sure that people that are in an at-risk area, that we can reach them, that they can be alerted with the right information to make sure that they can take action. We do believe that today there is still a great gap. Most people in the world today are not protected in terms of they are not reached when something happens. And so something that we emphasize is that we see today incredible growth in digital technologies and networks. And of course, what we promote is what we call a multi-channel approach. Any communication channel that is available needs to be used. Radio, television, sirens, social media, every communication channel is important. But I would, since you asked about the technologies, I would like to sort of focus on one, and that's mobile technologies, because that's the area where we really see the greatest opportunity. Because today, 90 or over 95% of the world's population is covered by a mobile network. And probably even more impressive as a number is that today, 8 out of 10 people own a mobile phone. That means I always say people have they have this siren system in their pocket. We all know how sort of addicted we are to the phones. We have our phones with us all the time. And these numbers are somewhat lower, but still very high, even in the world's poorest countries, in many developing countries. And what we highlight is that because we have these phones and this access and networks, there's great opportunities today to reach people over their mobile phones. And so one of the objectives of ITU is to really to ensure that we build effective early warning systems on these mobile early warning systems. And one of the technologies we particularly promote is cell broadcast, because it's a very easy way of reaching people. Messages can be sent directly to the phone. They cannot be ignored because they come with a sort of loud and terrible noise. The message appears on the phone. Almost all phones can be reached. We can send millions of messages without a problem of congestion, which is different from SMS messages. And also what's very important, it's geolocated. So people in the at-risk area can be reached. So this is really one of the technologies that we widely promote. And also very important, we work with the GSMA, that's the Association of Mobile Network Operators, because for the system to work, what is very critical is that the governments who are responsible for sending the alert, they work together with the mobile network operators, and they take advantage of these incredible networks that these operators have built. So this is really something we're promoting. In terms of the standards, what's very important when we talk about warning, dissemination, and communication is that we use the CAP, the Common Alerting Protocol, that is an ITU standard. And that is, it's not a communication channel, but is a format that ensures that messages are written in the same format and can be sent over different communication channels in the same format, so that we have coherence in the messages, and that people know what is happening and what they need to do and how to take action. And one last point I want to make, and again, ITU, of course, we focus a lot on the technologies, but what's very important is that with technologies, not every person that is vulnerable can be reached. So it's very important also for us to look at the people who cannot be reached through digital technologies. And then we work very closely, for example, with the IFRC, with REAP. I think they're also involved in this webinar, and with community-based organizations to ensure how can we reach those that are kind of left out if we rely on digital technologies. And again, very important to look at these different aspects and to make sure that everyone can benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vanessa. Thank you for making very useful points. So I move on to our next panelist, Jonathan. And Jonathan, as we have been now talking about these warnings, and now we know that from warnings we have to move to the action on the ground. So that's something which relates to you. So how do you think, how can community-based preparedness systems be strengthened to ensure warnings trigger early action on the ground? because that's ultimately we are doing all this warning, early warning system to see that there is a triggerance of all these actions on the ground. So over to you for 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, it's a real privilege to speak here on behalf of the Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent National Societies. As many of you know, and maybe there's some of our volunteers on the call, we represent 191 national societies who are auxiliaries to government. And we also, as our part of our pillar lead role within Early Warnings for All, represent a vast range of humanitarian organizations, including some very, very local ones. And if I might at the beginning just kind of clearly say that, you know, by no means are we the only actor working locally. And indeed, I think a lot of my other panelists have actually mentioned an awful lot of the things that they themselves do to trigger local action. And I suppose, you know, my first point that I'd like to say is that the things that enable people at risk to take action to reduce the risk come from a vast majority, a wide variety of different places, and everyone has a role to play. The risk knowledge that Loretta was talking about is absolutely vital for communities to understand what they might want to do. And of course, as many of you will know, as well as me, having worked in communities, you know, what puts people at risk is a vast number of factors. And largely, a lot of them are dominated by differential inequality or kind of poverty levels or access levels to information and warnings. And so I think really deeply understanding communities and the risks that they face and why they face them is critical, and whether that comes from risk knowledge or an understanding of the hazard is critically important. So one of the things that we do when we're working to prepare communities is we try and kind of separate ourselves a little bit from what maybe we would call the hazard bias. I think it's very good to focus on forecasts and warnings. They can always be improved, but I think the kind of those attending this webinar will know that, you know, most of the costliest or deadliest kind of disasters of the kind of definitely in this space of the last few decades have been forecast and have been warned about, or at least there's been some kind of warning. Now, has the warning been right for the people that were hearing it? Has the warning been transmitted to people? Has it reached them? Has it reached? Indeed, when people have got the warning, have they been able to do things? So we're really, I think, rather than doing a different bit of the system, we take our perspective, which is the community one, and then we're really trying to look back upwards through the rest of the delivery chain and really link in with those different partners in that way. And maybe just three brief things that we're really focusing on at community. So first is around investing in infrastructure and local response capacity. That's everything from ensuring that people have had some training to receive these messages from whether it's ITUs, kind of self-broadcasting or such. But also people need safe evacuation shelters to go to. They need ways to go there, whether they've got their documentation with them or not. They need to be safe. We're thinking about things like cooling centers for heat, and where can people go and find safe spaces, and of course pre-positioned supplies with local emergency response teams. Like once people reach a place of safety, you kind of want them to be able to stay there until the risk has passed. So you've got to make it a place that's okay. The second is around, you know, developing clear early action protocols and where possible pre-agreed financing. We've all talked a bit about money. I guess money makes stuff happen. That's why it's important. Don't want to talk about it all the time, but often it does really just make stuff happen. And as I think Johan said at the beginning, it's not often lots of money that's required, but it's smart investments that are required. And that's why it's been so brilliant as part of this Early Warnings for All process to see countries taking the lead in identifying their own roadmaps. The last thing the world needs is the international system going to countries to tell countries what they should do if only they had enough resources. What we've been really trying to do is deeply listen to countries, to communities, and to figure out where the investments should be made. And then the final thing, if I might, is around trust and awareness. And trust isn't just something that's built between those directly interacting with communities such as ourselves or other community-based organizations, but trust is built at all parts of the system. And I think that this very public initiative where the kind of all of us are in this together trying to improve it is critical for improving trust. Because once we can trust each other, once we can understand a system, we don't need a perfect system. We just need something that works most of the time, that people can trust and make decisions based on. So thanks so much for that.
Thank you very much. And of course, very nicely you put forth about the smart investment. Of course, at the end of the day, what we need is a smart investment, and then how best we can really see that it is really smart, so that it will definitely have a benefit. So I think that we are done with the first round, and the second round, I think we have the same amount of time, maybe a little bit less. So maybe I would request still if you can be much more precise. And the next round is more towards how best we can do the accelerating the implementation and bring in more inclusiveness. So that's what we are going to be focusing on the next round of this thing. So I'll start in the same order. And so maybe I'll start with Erica and from the WMO, that how is that WMO working with national governments? Because we know that the WMO works closely with the national governments, and particularly to localize the forecast, because we know the localization of the forecast is really very, very important. And how do you integrate them into multi-hazard early warning systems? So I think all these two, the localization of the forecast and the multi-hazard early warning systems, they both are really very, very important. So over to you, Erica.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, so I think within this space, I think it's important to note that there are a number of really high-performing forecasts at the moment. I think the challenge that we have in an area that we're working closely with our colleagues at ITU at is how we actually support digital transformation and access of some of these data sets to countries. So there's definitely, aside from internet access and better connectivity and cloud solutions with private sector partners like Microsoft, we're exploring a number of these different avenues. And they all really require capacity support in different ways. We're very lucky in terms of our ability to leverage a number of our longstanding supportive infrastructure arrangements. So we have 159 different specialized centers that are operationally actively exchanging data and processing forecasts. And I think a key element of our work is actually supporting and fostering twinning arrangements between more developed countries and less developed, and also, South-South collaboration, just to enable the merging of the data sets and more tailoring and downscaling to relevant scales within countries. I think this is one area that we're working in. I think in terms of really getting at the trust issue that Jonathan mentioned, it's really essential that we have partnership arrangements between the Met services and also some of the humanitarian agencies in countries. And the local actors, like CGIAR has a lot of activities in this space around co-design and really ensuring that there's connection between the Met services and some of the anticipatory action frameworks that are being sprouted, because I think through this collaboration and joint work together, you're able to have more trust. So those are just a couple of points from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for making very useful points. And now I move on to Loretta for the next question to you. Loretta, is in terms of what mechanisms do you think are in place to ensure early warning systems are being more inclusive, gender responsive, and having all of other social dimensions? So it's all about inclusivity. What do you, Loretta? I think you have, please unmute yourself. Yep.
Thanks. Thank you. I think that I would say that this is an area where we collectively need to do better, because it's not that the mechanisms may or may not be in place, but we continue to see that in disasters, there are certain groups that are left behind. And if I can just give my own example of being in Los Angeles during the fires in December and seeing that people living with disabilities were the ones that were most likely to perish in these fires because, in fact, the mechanisms weren't in place. Although the learning was, the systems were in place to issue the warnings, the actual mechanisms to ensure that early action was taken to evacuate or to help people who had disabilities to evacuate were not actually in place. And so this is something that we see recurrently. Now, through the Early Warning for All initiative, we are developing tools that we hope will really help ensure that when early warning systems are developed or when they're enhanced, that gender, disability, and other social dimensions are really taken into account. So the gap analysis tools that we have developed is just one example, but also looking at issues such as people-centered early warning design and really trying to ensure that we are promoting the idea that early warning messages and dissemination channels must be tailored to diverse populations. And we must identify where are persons with disabilities and marginalized groups living. And we do have good examples of where this is working. So, for example, in India's Odisha state, color-coded cyclone warnings and audible sirens. We've seen this in other countries, have been tailored for people with disabilities. But still, I feel like there is more work that needs to be done. And this would include really ensuring that local organizations and leaders and, at the local level are more involved in including representatives of different groups so that they can be more involved in developing the early warning system so that we can ensure that it is more responsive. The other issue I would maybe mention is the need for intersectional and disaggregated data collection, not only to gather it, but actually to use that data to ensure that the programming is really targeting those that are most in need. And this still remains a problem. We see it quite often. And finally, we are promoting inclusive policy frameworks. Of course, the Sendai framework and national gender action plans all make the point, but this is still, if I may give my own personal view, an area where we need to do better collectively. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Loretta. And now move on to the next Vanessa, and this is more towards the technology again for Vanessa. And as we know that we have been now using a lot of digital solutions. So how it is that ITU is supporting the governments in building resilient and inclusive communication systems? Because as everybody has said and agrees, that really a seamless communication is really very, very important. That's one of the most important elements. So over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you very much. And yes, I think, as you mentioned, really important to know who can actually be reached in which way. Also, the preferred communication channel for people. So, we're doing research on that. When we support countries, the first thing is, we do an assessment on this. How can people be reached? Who can be reached by digital networks? Who, we look at literacy rates, of course, important, all important factors to understand how people can be reached. But maybe just 2 points here that I want to highlight, to make systems more resilient and inclusive. We focus a lot on looking at innovative and also new technologies and it doesn't always mean if it's a new technology that it is not for people, for example, in rural or in remote areas. I think there's, many ways today to combine technologies with old and new technologies and to make the system work. And so maybe just 2 examples. First of all, in the area of artificial intelligence, I saw there was also 1 or 2 questions in the chat here. So the Early Warning for All initiative has set up an AI for Early Warning for All group that really looks into different ways of using AI to make early warning systems more resilient, more effective, and also more inclusive. And we're working with together with many other partners, and this is a cross-pillar group under the leadership of the Early Warning for All pillar leads, UNDRR, WMO, and IFRC and ITU. And we're really exploring the opportunities and present concrete examples across AI use cases to support the 4 pillars. And this is really by cultivating partnerships, again, also with the private sector, of course, to collaborate with stakeholders to identify ways of leveraging AI effectively and also ethically across the implementation of the initiative. And so we deliver capacity building and do development for awareness raising in the countries to see how the AI solutions that we have can be adapted and used in the country and also sustained. And this is, for example, one of the initiatives we have is we're working with Microsoft and really understanding where people are, how people move, which people are in at-risk areas, and which of these have access to digital technology. So really some exciting pilots that we are working on in countries. Another sort of innovative and I think exciting development I wanted to mention is in the area of satellite technologies, but not in the satellite area for related to pillar 2 WMO, but more on warning, dissemination, and communication, because here we have some really breakthrough technologies that today make it possible to reach people on their phone via satellite services. And this is known as what we call direct-to-device services, D2D. And so this is an important milestone in bridging the digital gap and also improving early warning systems with ubiquitous satellite services as they really effectively complement mobile access beyond the limits of these traditional networks. Because first of all, they extend the reach to underserved, remote, and rural areas, and also so ending the struggle that we have to cover geographic areas. So people at sea or in very rural areas, they can be reached. But they also provide backup services when terrestrial services are disrupted. So, for example, when there is a storm and the mobile towers are destroyed. So these are really excellent backup services. And the objective is that people at risk will eventually be able to use this service without any other equipment, just with a phone. People receive the same phone, the same message on their phone. They will not even realize whether it's sent over a mobile network or the satellite service. And this is some service that will be reaching people over the next few years. So we're, of course, trying to take advantage of this and working with the different developers of these systems to see how we can implement them in the countries that need these services most. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Jonathan, now we come to you regarding the anticipatory action. And can you share a successful example where anticipatory action based on early warning really made a difference for the communities, and especially if it is for the vulnerable communities? So over to you, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I'll be very brief because I know with the time. So last year, the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society successfully activated this thing we called an early action protocol for heat waves in Dhaka. Now, these early action protocols are developed over time. They kind of draw on knowledge from whether it's WMO, the national Met agencies, or UNDRR and others to understand the risk, to understand who's most at risk. And then they set some triggers or thresholds. And for heat, normally it's, a certain temperature for a certain number of days. Once that threshold is triggered, there's pre-agreed money that's available from the kind of the central bit of the Red Cross Red Crescent network, so IFRC here, which goes direct to the National Society, and they can instantly activate things. And what they were able to activate were cooling centers. So these are places with sometimes with air conditioning or kind of different shaped buildings that are much cooler for people, places where people can go and cool down their core body temperature. There was extra ambulance support, water stations, and volunteers were kind of raising awareness of dehydration risks and other protective measures. And so the Red Crescent Society specifically targeted school children, outdoor workers, and the elderly, who were the kind of like the three large groups that were most vulnerable. And the data will still come in, but we'd expect to see a significant reduction in kind of harm, loss, and suffering, and also an incredibly strong proof of concept. And so what we'd like to see is this everywhere, where heat stress would be an example, and of course we do it across other hazards. And this would not be possible without detailed monitoring of the hazard, detailed understanding of the forecast, ways to communicate a really good understanding of the risk, et cetera, et cetera. So I think these are the real examples of how a city and community level people can get straight to action and make a real difference.
All right, so thank you. I think we are running out of time. So let me check with Giriraj. Giriraj, do you have time for
Yeah, we have
Q&A?
got some few minutes to wrap up. Yeah, we can take another 5 minutes to 6 minutes to wrap up.
So maybe then, do you
We can
think we
take
can
one
go
or
for
two
some?
questions. One or
Okay.
two questions.
So from the virtual audience
Yeah,
who have some question there, I think there are some people who have raised a
I
question.
see Mandira Sirishta has raised her hand. Over to
Yeah.
you, Mandira.
Yeah, thank you,
Very brief.
Giriraj.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Yes.
Okay, thank you again. I think wonderful presentations regarding all the four pillars and what goes into all risk knowledge as well as detection, monitoring, communication, and then response. And my question is, very much we focused quite a bit on getting the information, early warning, reaching that information, whether through technology and various means. But as was said earlier also, despite early warning, there is no action or there's limited action being taken on the ground. And that's probably because of the communication continuum that we talk about. That is, it's not only about reaching or accessing that information, it's also about understanding of that information. It's also about acceptance of that information. And beyond acceptance comes the action. That's a behavioral change. So in that entire continuum, how is it that we can ensure that the action is taken on the ground, apart from the information getting down to the people or the last mile? Because there are many instances, for example, the floods of Nepal in 2024, last year, there was good forecast. It was disseminated very much on time, but despite that, more than 200 people lost their lives. So I just wanted some insights into this, how you can ensure that action is taken on the ground where it's understood and as well as accepted by the people. Thank you.
Yeah, very rightly you said, because that's what I think Jonathan was trying to make a point, that action on the ground and that how best. So I don't know, Jonathan would like to say anything to her?
Well, I kind of feel like, we do the bit where the message reaches us, but perhaps Vanessa would like to come in here, because this is about a communication to enable the inaction.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Vanessa.
think again, one piece is that the information reaches the people you mentioned already. It has to be understandable. So it has to be written in a way that people know what kind of action to do. But I think it's actually really important also before disasters happen, to inform people and to let them know how they will be reached, but also to understand, for example, which communication sources they trust. And there, for example, IFRC is working on the Community Trust Index for early warnings, and we're starting to pilot those in a number of countries. But also the information, I think, needs to be adapted to the local communities, to those that are exposed and vulnerable. And we also have to look and understand the behavioral determinants, which really then influence the information uptake and the decisions to take action. Because as we hear this again all the time, you can have the technology in place, you can have the message that reaches people, but it's really if people don't take action, then we have a problem. And that's what makes the system so complex, because if one piece of the early warning system doesn't work, the whole system doesn't work. And the people are really at the core of the system, and the key people need to react. So I think it's a lot about understanding the people and preparing them for what will happen, how they will reach the information, and the actions that they need to take.
Thank you very much. And now I think, Giriraj, perhaps we don't have much time left. And
Sure.
what I see is that there are some other questions in the Q&A which have already been responded also by the panelists, like I'm looking into AI and IoT. And then we have, as Giriraj mentioned, we have a list of those questions in the chat. And Giriraj will try and get back to all of you,
Sure.
depending on who all have asked, to see that how best we can really respond to those things later on. So with this, I thank and congratulate all the panelists and the lead speaker for really sharing very, very insightful thoughts. And with all this, I think I don't have time. Otherwise, I had noted down a lot of points. I would have elaborated it, but I think I'll leave it here for now. And over to you, Giriraj, to
Thank you.
close the
Thank
session.
you, Dr. Alok Sika, for moderating the session and also all the panelists. I would also have taken a lot of notes. It was quite a learning for me, listening from all the 4-pillar lead organization. I would just say by ending that, let's take these lessons forward, because this is just first the inaugural seminar. We are expected to have another 17 sessions that would happen in due course of time until December. We are reaching out to all the partners, and we welcome more speakers and panelists to join us. And it was very clear that it's the panelists have spoken clearly on not just on the technology, but also trust building, tailoring the solutions of the forecast skills, the transformative partnership, because the early warning is all about the transformative partnership that they are all vehicle in this journey. And let's try to work on that. The next session will happen on April 15th, where you would learn more experience on the science behind the early warning, on the concept where we talk about much more details on the data models and predictions. So we would keep posting all the recorded videos as well as the questionnaire and the debate, and that the sessions will be summarized for this session 1. So with that, thank you very much for all the participants specifically to staying with us in regions in South Asia. It's quite late for Europe, and also from people from Pacific region, and as well as from Africa around the world. And we look forward to seeing you in other sessions. And thanks to all the panelists for making this, and as well as the keynote speaker for delivering, and my own colleagues, Dr. Sika and also Dr. Mark Smith, for staying with us. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.